So here's the structure for tonight. They're going to make maybe half-hour presentation about what it is they are, or what about their company. I think they've passed out some information. And then we'll have maybe half an hour, 40 minutes to ask questions. So depending on how many questions we've got, and before we start the question and answer session, we'll have a sense of how far they've gotten along in their presentation. The restriction to us in terms of time is that we've got a meeting coming up at 7 after this. So we may have to limit questions to 5 minutes, but let's feel that out after we get finished with the presentation itself. Okay.
Thanks. Not sure if up or down or however you guys want it. I'll try it both ways here. But my name's Scott Busa. I'm with NextEra Energy Resources. It's a Florida-based company, and we develop energy plants all over the U.S. and Canada. So we're going to talk a little bit about our company tonight and what we're doing in Connecticut, and also what we're doing here in Enfield, and answer any questions you guys have. So this is early on in sort of the development of the project. It takes years actually to develop a solar project or any energy project. And as a company, we like to kind of get out, early on in the process, before we've submitted, certain applications, to get some feedback from the public. We also like to meet with the town committees, and another reason that we're here tonight and here in this particular venue is to inform the folks, our leadership here in town, what's happening with the project. We're also, taking feedback on if there's any particular issues that you guys want us to look at or address, or see if we have addressed them or looked at them. That's what we're here to do. We will be having another sort of public meeting at the end of the month. On the 31st it's going to be. We haven't fixed the venue yet, but it's actually likely to be out at the project site. And so if tonight you're just here to take in some information and then want to have another opportunity for us to answer questions to you in kind of a one-on-one and not in such a public information setting, we will be back in a couple of weeks to do that too. So if you don't get your question in tonight, we will be back in a couple of weeks and be able to talk to you one-on-one and answer them again. So NextEra Energy Resources. As I mentioned, we are based in Florida, but you'll notice Florida's not really colored in there. Our sister company is Florida Power and Light, which is the largest utility in Florida and actually one of the largest utilities in the United States. We've got about 5 million customers in Florida. So we have a long history of running a utility, owning and operating power plants, building power plants, and that goes back to the 1920s. So we've been around for quite a while. In the late 1980s, we decided, as the energy markets were deregulating around the country, we decided that we would sort of diversify and do power projects around the U.S. and Canada. So you can see by the map here that we have a number of dots. It's kind of hard to tell what color they are, but those are mostly wind projects, many solar projects. We also operate fossil fuel, natural gas in particular projects. A couple of nuclear sites, including Seabrook, New Hampshire, actually belongs to our company. And so diversified, we do a little bit of pipeline and transmission work too. So, but our mainstay is wind and solar. Go ahead to the next slide. As a matter of fact, we are the world leader in wind and solar operations and development in the United States. We have been operating the wind projects and the solar projects going back to the like I said, the 1980s. So it's been a long time. Photovoltaics, which is what the project we're going to be proposing here, is sort of new. It's only been really economical to build photovoltaic projects in the last 5-7 years or so. So our early experience was with solar thermal. That project there is sort of the original solar project and what they would look like, which is actually mirrors that concentrate the sun's energy onto a tube that runs down the center of the mirrors. and heats up that fluid in there and then takes it back to a power block and generates energy that way. So that was the original kind of solar projects that were built in the United States. And since then, though, the availability and the cost for photovoltaics, which is the one up here, have come down to the point where it's really economical to put those in, not only in the sunniest areas of the country, but also all over the country and Canada too. It's this. Go ahead to the next slide. Just a couple of points on the larger solar projects. So we are a company that builds what we call universal scale or utility scale solar projects, and those are the larger projects. So we don't do residential rooftop, but we do commercial and kind of projects up from there. So we get involved with projects that could be behind the meter, which would be like located on your property. But mostly what we do are the larger, multi-acre, multi-hundred-acre, or even multi-thousand-acre projects that cover quite a bit of ground and produce quite a bit of megawatts. The total installed capacity right now we have for megawatts of solar is over 2,000, almost 2,200 megawatts. Just recently, as I mentioned, the original kind of focus of solar was in the desert Southwest, so I've done a lot of work in California, Nevada, Arizona. But again, as the cost came down and the ability to take advantage of even the limited or less amount of sun that we have around New England and other areas, we've been branching out. So in 2016, we opened up projects in New Mexico, Nevada, Georgia, Minnesota, Alabama, so different places around the country. So what's good about solar? It's emission-free. There's a lot of debate on carbon dioxide and global warming and all of those things, but certainly one of the answers to if that's really a question or not is to generate electricity by solar power. There is no water or air pollution from a solar project, and it basically just sits there. And in particular, the ones that we're looking for here are fixed tilt. Basically, we point them towards the south, and they stay there, they don't move. Some of the other ones that we have around the country actually track the sun. And there's a little bit more maintenance associated with those, but the ones that are planned for here in Connecticut and in Enfield are the fixed tilt where they don't actually move at all. So there is really no noise, not a lot of maintenance associated with them. Go ahead to the next slide. And I want to point out too, these are the same solar panels that would be using in this project as that you'd use on your rooftop. So they're not bigger than or contain anything else that the project, the same type of solar panels that you put on your rooftop have. So this is basically scaled up to multiple acres and produce a lot more megawatts than that you would have on your rooftop, but it's essentially the same system. The panels absorb light from the sun. They actually produce a direct current or a DC voltage, same thing that your calculator or anything like that would have. And then in order to get it onto the grid, we actually have to convert it over to alternating current or AC, the same system as in your home, and then it gets put onto the transmission system and the distribution system, and then gets distributed to you as a local user. And we'll talk a little bit about exactly how our contracts are for this project and who we're selling the power to. So go ahead to that. Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk a little about project specific.
Great, thank you, Scott. I'm going to sit, if that's okay with everybody. If you need me to stand up, just holler at me, I guess. So my name is Aaron Svedlow. I'm the project director for New England. Based in Portland, Maine. I've been doing renewable energy in New England for well over a decade, most recently with a company called Ranger Solar, and now with NextEra Energy. So I come from a background of environmental science and citing renewable projects in a manner that has the least impact essentially on the landscape, and that's one of the things I'm bringing to this project. But I want to go through what we're up to in Connecticut briefly, tell you guys about how we came to be here, how our projects were selected, what we've done so far on the Nutmeg project, which is what we call our project here in Enfield, and what our next steps are, as well as our next steps for engaging and continuing to engage with the community here in Enfield and with all the stakeholders throughout the state that might be of interest. So we have 3 utility scale projects here in Connecticut. The Nutmeg project here in Enfield is 20 megawatts, as is our Constitution project in Plainfield. And then the Quinnebog Solar Project, which is 50 megawatts. It's in the towns of Brooklyn and Canterbury. We actually recently submitted our permit application for that site, and it's in the siting council process. And I'll talk a little bit more about Quinnebog in a moment, because there's some commonalities there, where there were some lessons learned from that process that we're going to bring to the Nutmeg project as well. So all of our projects in Connecticut were selected through the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP. Was part of one of the agencies that helped select our projects to sell power to the Connecticut utilities. So the energy will be sold locally to Connecticut, and these projects will bring substantive new investment to Enfield and Connecticut, and substantial new tax revenue without needing many services. So that's a really big bonus in my mind for the town. So how did we get here and how did we get selected? So Connecticut has a renewable portfolio standard, 20% by 2020. And as part of that, the legislature essentially asked DEEP and others to run a request for proposals for new renewable energy projects under something called a Tier 1 or a Class 1 renewable project. And that's what our solar projects fit under. So our projects were aimed at helping Connecticut meet its renewable energy goals. So beyond just renewable energy, New England as a whole has a need for energy, right? So we're not increasing in load. There's not a lot of new energy users in New England, but what there is there's a lot of older energy generation facilities that are coming offline. And we see, for example, Pilgrim Nuclear is slated to retire in 2019. We saw Vermont Yankee, another large nuclear facility, go offline as well. So we're seeing these older facilities go offline, and we need something to replace them. So not just meeting Connecticut's renewable goals, but also meeting the energy goals and the energy need for New England just for base load. So in that DEEP 2016, sorry, Andy's getting ahead of me. In that 2016 request for proposals, we submitted our Connecticut sites in, and they were selected, and we were allowed the chance to enter into a power purchase agreement negotiation with the utilities. So we've completed that negotiation, and all of our projects have a 20-year power purchase agreement with the Connecticut utilities. So next, we got selected. How did we find the sites that got selected? Because there's a lot of options out there, right? So one of the things that we look for when we're trying to site new projects, new generation projects, is existing electrical infrastructure. And that's one of the benefits of solar, is it doesn't need to be on a ridge top or like offshore wind out in the water. It can be located next to an existing substation and existing transmission lines. So that's one of the first things we look at. And we want to know whether or not those are good transmission lines to interconnect to. So we do studies with the ISO New England, which is the grid operator, and the utilities to make sure that we're in a good place to interconnect. And then we look at the property basically around those areas to determine if there's suitable locations. We don't want to be siting solar projects in sensitive natural resource areas where there could be endangered species or a large percentage of wetlands on the property. As well as cultural resources. We want to be sensitive to prehistoric artifacts as well as historic sort of colonial period structures that could potentially be affected by projects. And then, of course, we need to gauge the landowner's interest if they want to be a participating landowner in a project. Typically in New England, and in Connecticut's no different, we typically do a lease. So we'll enter into a lease agreement with a landowner for the life of the project. A lot of our project landowners are farmers, or in Maine, for example, a lot of them are forestry operations. And they find that this guaranteed income stream on a portion of their property can help them continue their traditional uses of the land elsewhere. They can continue to farm and do their forestry practices on the remainder of their property and retain the value there by keeping it as a lease, essentially. So then what do we do when we find a site? We want to know more about it, right? So we're gonna study the site, and what we've been doing here in Enfield on the Nutmeg project is over the last year and a half, we've done a fairly intensive number of environmental, cultural, and geological surveys. And we'll continue to do a few more of those right up until we go into the permitting process. So those include wetland studies, vernal pool studies. Those are the spring pools that salamanders and frogs like to breed in, as well as water bodies. We want to make sure we're avoiding streams. We know where all the constraints on the property are before we start trying to design a facility. We also look at rare plants. There's a small window of time where we can search for certain species, so we have to make sure we do that in the right season, usually June and July. As well as rare animals and bats. Bats are one of the species in New England in particular that are of concern. We actually had some folks out on the property with recording devices, listening to bats to determine which species were out there. Archaeological and historic resources I mentioned earlier. We did a full, what's called a Phase 1A assessment, and we work closely with the State Historic Preservation Officer to make sure that we know what's on the site, if there's anything, and we're able to avoid or mitigate impacts to any cultural resources on the property. And then we do what's called a geotechnical study as well as soil studies. We want to know what's under the ground so we can design the facility in a way that we have the least impact and we don't have to move large quantities of soil or anything like that. Generally, there's very minimal actual soil disturbance as part of these projects. So once we know, that we have a site and that we have been selected to sell the power, then we want to engage the community, which is what we're doing here tonight. And we actually started this process quite some time ago. We had some preliminary meetings with town leadership, with the mayor and the town manager to inform them about the project. We've also been meeting with some of the state regulators. And then we started approaching the town in a little bit more earnest, had some sort of preliminary tax conversations about how the project might be assessed, and we hope to continue those over the last couple weeks and months. And then just recently, last week, we had an abutter event. And one of the things that's important to us is for us to get the message out about the project to the project's neighbors first. Right? We want the folks that live next door to know that there's a project, a potential project, a proposed project. So we had a mass mailing of invites that went out for an abutter event. That was last week, and we sent the invites 2 weeks ahead of that. And then we plan to have a town-wide open house, as Scott had mentioned earlier, on August 31st, where we hope anybody in town or elsewhere that has questions about the project can come. We'll have food. We'll have a lot of experts there, environmental experts, engineering experts, et cetera, to answer questions folks may have. But let me just back up a little bit. At the abutter event, we did receive some feedback from some of the abutters about some of their concerns about the project, and that's important for us. Because one of the reasons why we come here early is so we can get that feedback while we're still working through the design process and developing the project. So we did take some feedbacks from some of the abutters. We've actually incorporated some of that feedback already into another iteration of our site plan. And we'll continue to do that as we move forward to try to adapt the project where we can or identify areas where we might be able to do some landscaping to mitigate some impacts. We actually moved some panels already on the site plan based on some feedback that we received last week. So again, we're hoping to get some more feedback on the 31st. And of course, we're going to continue our consultations with state and federal agencies, as well as the elected officials for this area. So we have a site, we know it's on the site, we're starting to engage the community. Now just a little bit about the Connecticut process. So the Siting Council has jurisdiction over these larger scale energy projects. And again, this is a 20 megawatt project. It'll take up about 100 acres of project area. Projects less than 65 megawatts seek a petition for declaratory ruling. So that's just one process within the Siting Council. As part of that, we really want to make sure that the town gets to provide feedback to us as well as to the Siting Council moving forward. So there's an opportunity for the town to engage directly in that process with the Siting Council. So the council conducts a comprehensive review of all those environmental and cultural items that I mentioned earlier, and looks at the electrical grid impacts. And I should say that we've been working with Eversource to enter into what's called an interconnection agreement. And we have that for the facility. We started that quite some time ago because, geez, those things just take forever. They take about a year, if not longer. So we're there now, and we have that. But we still need to go through the full Siting Council process and submit our petition. And again, just the importance of engaging with the host community, not just now before we enter the process, but also during that process with the Siting Council. So this is the project area. This is the boundary of the property that we have an interest in, lease rights or a purchase right to. This is not to say that this is where the project footprint will be. This is a much larger area than the project will actually take up. So this is a 260 acre area approximately. And then now that we have all this information about the constraints within there, we're going to figure out, we have been figuring out, I should say, the best places to put the 100 acres of actual development within that envelope, right? So our project will connect directly to the existing Eversource transmission system. So there's a 115,000 volt line that already comes through here into a substation, and we're going to be plugging directly into that. So this is all existing electrical infrastructure that we'll be utilizing as part of our project. Excellent. So as I mentioned before, we completed all of our natural and cultural resource assessments. We've been preparing site plans. Some of you may have seen some of those if you came to the Butter event. We have one here tonight that we can hold up and kind of show folks if they're interested. But again, we're here very early in the process, so none of these things are set in stone. There's still a lot of time and flexibility for us to sort of take your feedback and incorporate it where we can. And that's what we hope to do. So our plan right now is to submit the project to the Siting Council in the fall. It should take about 6 to 8 months to go through that process with the Siting Council. All of the abutter work and town engagement that we're doing now, up until the point when we submit our petition, is voluntary engagement work. So this is stuff that we're doing because we think it's important. We think it's very relevant for the community to know what we're up to, especially since this project will be in your town. And although it provides benefits, it's a change in the town. So we want to make sure everybody here was aware of it and in the town. But once the petition's submitted, that's not the end of the public engagement process. There's actually a formal public hearing process with the Siting Council. They'll do a site visit on the property, and then they'll hold a public comment period and hearing. likely here or in a gymnasium. So then there's this voluntary period that we're in now, and then this whole other regulatory sort of mandated public engagement process with the siting council. Go to the next slide. Thanks. So Scott mentioned earlier safe, low-cost, renewable energy. As part of that Connecticut Deep RFP process, we were selected out of a bunch of other projects because we were competitive, because our power prices were reasonable, and because the evaluators felt that our team could execute the project, which is all important to Connecticut meeting its renewable energy goals. So there are approximately 80 construction jobs during the construction period. There's some additional full-time operation jobs for the life of the project. Again, this is a $30 million new investment. That investment's coming to the town of Enfield and will not require any services to speak of. It's not like a large new residential development or commercial development that will require a lot of services from the community. So essentially, it's a net taxpayer to Enfield. And so we expect to generate millions of dollars of new tax revenue for the community here, which I've been monitoring a lot of what's going on in the State House and some of the budget issues there, and those budget shortfalls and the potential for additional property taxes being levied in the fall potentially. This new tax revenue to the town is certainly a benefit. So, just wanted to circle back to Quinnebog, which is our 50 megawatt project over in Canterbury. And we went through a very similar process as we're undertaking now in Enfield, in Canterbury and Brooklyn, and had a lot of similar meetings to this, a lot of abutter events, et cetera. And I just wanted to provide a little bit of a quote where we got with the first selectman in Canterbury. We also received a number of letters of support from people in the community, as well as some of the legislative representatives. I'm sorry. So we hope to reach that same goal here tonight. So I think we can take questions now. Thank you all for listening to me talk.
I have one question back here. Would there be any transmission equipment that's not already on the existing 200-acre site that would have to be added? The high wires or the infrastructure?
Good question. The wires that are there now are 115 kV, 115 kilovolts, which is 115,000 volts. The project will not need any new transmission infrastructure like that. There will be some electrical infrastructure within the facility. Almost all of that is underground. There will be a small transformer next to the existing substation. If you want to go, can you go back to the one with the map? Yeah. So in order to interconnect, we're going to have to build a small transformer here that will interconnect to the substation there. But other than that, there's no new transmission lines for the project.
Hi, my name is Mark Durfee. I'm a 30-year homeowner in Enfield and a retired Army officer. And my home is on the bottom, a little jog there on Charnley Road. So I'm going to feel a significant impact because the panels will be facing south right into the side of my house. And according to the chart that I saw at your event last Tuesday, you're going to cut the trees all the way across that whole area, which actually shows where the panels are. That whole area is going to be panels. So I don't understand that. But first of all, I went to your event last week, and I asked a few questions. I don't think I got very good answers. First was my property values. Okay? If I was going to go look for a house now, I wouldn't be looking for a house where half of it was open fields to solar panels. And one of the gentlemen at your organization said, "Oh, we found that there's no impact on property values." Well, I almost laughed because that's a ridiculous. That doesn't make sense to me. Second was the direction of the solar panels, and one gentleman told me they were rotating back and forth, and another gentleman told me no, they are facing south. So, again, I assume they're facing south since you just said so. And that, again, the glare and the heat, I don't know how that's going to affect my home. Groundwater, in your flyer, it talked about how periodically you got to clean the panels and you may need, various types of water. I have a well. It's going to affect my well, I think. Barriers. One of the panels that you had at the thing last week was actually probably taken from the corner of my lot, and it went out into which is now a tobacco field, and it showed an artist's rendition of all the panels being there, and a couple of arborvitae plants kind of laying along the way, and that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it at all. It's going to definitely be a problem. Okay. So I'm very concerned about this project because I'm right next to it, and I retired here from the Army. I retired to have a quiet part of town. And I think you made a comment about we're changing the face of Enfield because this part of Enfield is on the rural side of town, and what's going to be left of the rural part of Enfield after this is in there? There's not going to be much left. If you look at your chart, there's about a third to a half is open fields right now, and the rest is trees. And my understanding is that all those trees will be gone. Okay. That is not what I would consider going green. That's kind of upside down. I also would like to know if the state is involved in this. I'm not sure how this is working, but I called the town clerk, and apparently 169 acres has been sold to the state for a price of $722,586, which comes out to $4,275 per acre. And the title of this it was called a purchase of acquisition of development rights, which I have no idea what that even means. I'm not a lawyer, but it just doesn't make sense to me that. And I've actually emailed with the mayor, town council, state senator, and initially the mayor said, "Oh, it's pretty much a done deal. Okay, this is going to happen." And then I went to town council, and they came back with some more information. No, it's not a done deal. There's some input from the community and the town. So I'm getting mixed signals from politicians, and I got a couple more emails this afternoon, which kind of led me to the other direction where it's a done deal. And I just don't understand how the state would have the authority and the power to make this happen. And if I want to put a shed up in my backyard, I got to go to the town and get that approved. You want to basically change the face of a huge portion of Enfield, and we have no say in the matter.
Thank you, first of all, for your service and also for your comments. So I hear your concerns. So and let me recap so I can try to address them. So the proximity of the project to your property and potential clearing of trees there and the panels, as well as glare. There was a comment about the wells, water usage on the property. There was also some comments about the state involvement in some property sales. What else am I missing? I'm sorry.
Property value.
Property value. Thank you. Okay. So let me start with if it's okay, I'll start with the state property sale. I don't know what that is. I apologize. All of our property is private. We've acquired it privately. The state is not involved with this project at all, except for a regulatory process and approval process. So the state's not a partner in the project. It's a private enterprise. There's a state regulatory approval process.
Okay, that's not what the town clerk said, so I don't know.
I can clarify that if you want me to. It's
Yes,
Roger
sir.
O'Brien, Director of Planning, Town of Enfield. The state purchased adjacent land, part of Jarmark. They purchased the development rights, a different program, a different division of DEEP. So basically you have two things going on the Jarmark farm. One is a substantial number of acres was purchased. The development rights were purchased by DEEP under the program where the state purchase the development rights, and that and then the land is able to remain in farming forever. So that's what took place maybe a month ago when they filed the maps in the town clerk's office. These folks have a different portion of the Jarmark farm. So it's interesting. There are two different entities within DEEP involved. I know it's confusing, but the good news is the property that the state bought the development rights on.
So again, the property's private, and it's a private enterprise that's approved by the state. Would you mind coming up here just for a sec? And we can get this up on the screen too, but last week, I think when we showed you right up to here. So we've come back quite a bit, and I think we'd like to continue talking to you about how we can make this impact less. So.
Hey, Mr. Durfee, I got a hold of you guys a little bit late when I got into town today, but I tried to give you guys a call, make sure you were aware of this meeting, and I'm happy to set up. I live in New Haven, Connecticut. I'm Jonathan Wilson, by the way. I'm an associate project manager at NextEra. I live in New Haven, Connecticut, and so anytime kind of after next week, I have some other engagements, but I'm happy to come by. I'm going to be doing a lot of neighbor engagement here for the folks that showed up to the public or to the workshop last week, and then for the folks that weren't able to make it. So I'll be scheduling meetings and be here in town over the next weeks or however long it takes to kind of make sure that I'm talking with every abutter, getting everybody's input. I was on Taft Lane talking with a couple folks today, and so I'm happy to meet with you guys again kind of privately and discuss some more of that, you know.
So, and just, we can show some folks afterwards. As of now, based on your feedback, we don't plan to cut any of the trees on that property line behind your house there. And then on the water issue, no wells, no new wells or town water are proposed as part of the project. Any water required for the project is almost certainly going to be trucked in to be used, for cleaning, although that rarely happens, or for other purposes. It would most likely come from offsite. Property values and appraisal issues. It's an issue that comes up a lot when I do these types of meetings. We have some objective evidence from the town of Somers next door. We talked to the appraisal folks over there about how property values may have changed since they had their utility scale project. The feedback that my colleagues got from their folks was that really there hasn't been any changes in property values as a result of that project. One of the things that I mentioned before is the added tax revenue from these projects. That in my mind could be seen as a boon for property values in a town where you have some other entity shouldering a chunk of the load of the property taxes in the town. That can be seen as a good opportunity.
I wouldn't buy my house now if I knew this was happening. I wouldn't buy it, and I'm sure there's many other people in that same boat.
So again, we don't have a lot of evidence that it's going to adjust or change property values, and again, we're willing to work with you to figure out how we can minimize those impacts, screen the facility from your home or other people's homes, we're a quiet neighbor. Once it goes up, there's not moving out there. It is a fixed panel facility, so that there is no movement. And then you asked about glare too. That's something we pay a lot of attention to. We have a project we're working on in Maine that's actually on an airport. It's on a former naval air base in Sanford, Maine. And we have just actually recently been able to permit with the FAA panels actually in the infield of the airport. And so the glint glare issues have not really materialized for these projects. The panels themselves are meant to really absorb sunlight. That's how they produce energy. So that's not something that we're seeing being a major issue. But certainly, let's keep talking about it. Let's figure out how we can avoid that if there is any potential for
Okay. Donna Suzak, District 3 resident, Town Council at Large. I have a couple of questions. Is this solar considered a farming activity?
Is solar considered a farm? This is a solar energy facility. No, it is not.
It is not. It is an actual utility. Okay, so the equipment and everything is taxed at regular rates.
That's my understanding, correct.
Okay. And at the end of 20 years, what happens to the soil in the facility should this move forward?
Good question. So a couple things there. We have a commitment to our landowners in our agreements to remove the facility after its useful life. And we have to remove it and return it to pre-existing conditions to the best extent practicable that we can do. So we will also have that commitment as part of our siting council approval. We will have a requirement to decommission the facility, and we will have to post either a bond or a letter of credit to pay for that decommissioning in case, God forbid, something happens and nobody's around. There'll be funds aside to remove the project.
Okay. And the last question I have right now is, has the Brooklyn or Canterbury facility been installed?
No. So the Quinnebog project is slightly ahead of this one in that it's in the siting council process right now. We actually just had our pre-hearing conference yesterday in New Britain. So that project will take a number of months to go through that process. We submitted a binder that, I'm not kidding, is the largest binder I've ever seen. It's about this thick with all of the required information that the siting council looks for. We provided copies of that to the towns of Brooklyn and Canterbury, as well as Plainfield, just as an abutting town. And we would intend to do the same thing here, but frankly, you'll have a lot of that information well ahead of that process as we continue to engage with the town here.
Make a quick schedule.
Oh,
No, for this one.
yeah. So Scott asked me to give a quick schedule. So our plan would be to submit this fall, probably early this fall, our petition. After that, they'll set a pre-hearing conference that'll probably be in November or December. Following that, it's about 45 days before they set up the public meeting, 30 to 45 days. Don't quote me on this, but it's available online. 30 to 45 days before they set up the public meeting and the site visit. And then there's interrogatories and some quasi-judicial processes. And then it'll wrap up in 6 to 8 months total. So the woman in the back had her hand up.
Hi, Melissa Everett, Chair of the Enfield Clean Energy Committee, and I have a two-part question, one for you guys and one for Roger. And it's easy. The Roger part is going to be easy, I think. So biased to want this to work. I would like to see us move to 100% renewable energy, and yet I know that the land use issues are difficult. I know that energy decommissioning has been a kind of blunt instrument historically. I mean, if you do a mountaintop removal mine and then you plant some nice trees on it, that's decommissioning. I would expect you guys to have a higher standard. But I'd like to know more about what you consider the state of the art for, really returning farmland and forest land to something like its previous, state.
Good question. So you're interested in, how is our decommissioning process?
Like how you really do that? What does that really look like? I mean, because we're talking 20 years in the future, and most solar facilities are not 20 years old yet.
Yeah, no, good point. Although some of the ones Scott may have built are. No offense.
He doesn't remember those.
So let me talk a little bit about what's involved in the actual facility, because I think I actually kind of glossed over that earlier. Let me go back to like a picture of panels. That one's good. So the facility itself it consists of some gravel access roads, right? There'll be a few gravel access roads installed to get to what are called the inverter paths. So these are electrical inverters that convert the direct current from the panels into AC, alternating current, that goes on the grid that you use in your house. In addition to that, there's the panels and the racking. And the racking for these facilities, for fixed PV facilities, is essentially a fence post or an H-beam that's driven into the ground that supports the panels themselves and has a certain wind loading and snow loading factor associated with it. And then between the panels and those inverters are collector lines. And those are trenched underground and go back to the collector lines. So when we're talking about decommissioning, what we're talking about removal of the panels, removal of the racking, removal of the inverters. Depending on the landowner's interest in the existing gravel roads, they could stay or they could go. Essentially, we're planning to put them in areas where there's existing farm roads, so they may want to, continue using those. Removal of the inverter pads, and a removal of most of the collector lines as well. So really returning the property back to a state where it could be farmed, likely by Owen, no offense, Steve, or another farmer in the future. Another advantage of the solar project has been on the property for 20 plus years. It's allowed that soil to stay fallow for that period of time. So the sort of intensive, again, no offense to Jarmarks, but agricultural activity can be intensive on soil. So leaving soils fallow for a period of time often allows them to recover.
But how much of the installation will be on farmland and how much on forest land?
Can you go back? Yeah, maybe you want to hold that up first. Sure. So that's a good point. And land use issues, especially in Connecticut, are challenging, right? There's not a lot of land. We have these aggressive energy, renewable energy goals, so we got to put these facilities somewhere. One of the great things about the Nutmeg facility, in my mind, is it's a balance of farmland and forest land. So it's not just farmland. So we'll be using these portions of the farm, and then this area will be forest. There'll be a swath right here that's left forested, and then a majority of this area will be converted back to a field, essentially pasture land for the crop.
But then that's what and I don't want to dominate this whole, I'll stop in a second. But just so when you are decommissioning something that used to be a forest,
Yeah.
what happens? Or maybe the landowners have a thought.
Good question, right? So you're asking whether or not it goes back to forest, or we plant trees, or what happens to it after
Or maybe the Jarmarks would have some thoughts, and you haven't talked about this yet, and I'm putting everybody on the spot, but,
We won't be required to report that.
I can do that.
Yeah, so if the landowners at the time wanted to revert back to forest, natural forest succession will occur. The trees will grow back up, and it'll just become forest. Over a reasonably short period of time, 15 to 20 years, you'll see a forest there. We will not be planting. We're not going to replant the trees. But if the landowners at that time say, "Hey, this is a great sheep pasture," or whatever, it could continue as that.
And then just quickly to Roger, and then I will hand off this microphone. What portion of the town's kind of rural area is this, and how do you see this fitting in the overall kind of open space strategy?
I've done it for the whole state of Connecticut.
Yeah, Melissa, I'm going to pass on that because I'm here like you tonight, gathering the information. I can't hear you. I said I'm gonna pass on comment on that because, like everyone else, I'm here tonight gathering information, and it's way too early in the process to make any sort of assessment like that. I'm sure as we go along, we're gonna be able to answer that question, but not tonight.
Hi, my name's Micah. I live here in Enfield. I just had a question about the approximately 80 construction jobs, the full-time operations and things like that. Like, what's it going to look like day to day once it's done? Where we'll be looking for those people to fill those positions, or will you be relying on local businesses as well to support the infrastructure here, things like that?
So for the construction aspect of it, we do hire typically an EPC or a general contractor to come in, and they do the vast majority of the hiring. I mean, just my experience in general is it doesn't make any sense to bring in people from that don't live in the nearby area. Certainly not necessarily Enfield, but in the area, because they're generally not a very high-skilled job set where you have to bring a specialist in from Texas or something like that. So for the most part, it makes sense to not pay a per diem and a travel and a hotel or anything like that. So we see that 90% of the jobs are going to be filled approximately locally from somebody that's already here for construction purposes. On the operations piece, again, we're only talking to two to four people, I believe we set up there. And they would actually likely have responsibilities for not just this project, but some of the other projects that we're proposed in Connecticut. So what that means is that there would not necessarily even be anybody every day at the facility. So they, you might come a couple of times a week or 5 times a week, something like that, depending on what maintenance activities need to be done. But again, it's something that typically is trained for, and generally we don't have a bunch of specialists back in Florida, looking for jobs in Connecticut necessarily, but it makes sense to have somebody locally. Obviously, it's somebody we want to be able to drive to this project and to other nearby projects. So, again, for the most part, it is done with local folks. Thank you.
One thing that our engineering folks, the construction crews will likely do is hold a job fair or some sort of process closer to construction.
Hi, Karen LaPlante, happen to be chair of the Agricultural Commission, and I'd like to thank Steve and Owen for preserving those acres that you did and not selling this land off as a development and never being able to use it as farmland ever again. I see the solar panels possibly as a temporary situation for 20 years. It could be put back into farming. Once we lose our farmland, we have the best soils in practically the country in this Connecticut River Valley. And I don't like to see our properties being covered up with cement and steel buildings. So a $30 million project on some open farmland, I'd like to learn more. I happen to have 28 solar panels at my house. They are ground mounted. They do not affect my well. They do not send off heat off into the land. I'm on dead sand. I couldn't grow grass back there anyway, but I don't have too many weeds underneath because I had to put stone underneath so that it wouldn't grow grass. Otherwise, I would have plenty of grass growing. So it doesn't stop any grass from growing. There doesn't seem to be any glare. I don't know what the airplanes do when they fly over, but I like my solar panels a lot. So welcome to Enfield, and good luck with your project.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And just one point that was brought up that I think is important is, again, it's essentially a temporary use of the property, although a long-term temporary use. Residential development, commercial development, although important and vital to our economic growth, is not readily reversible like a solar facility would be.
Hello, my name is Sandy Petronella, 7 Charnley Road, and we also have the empty lot at number 5. There was a blighted property there that we acquired. We demoed the project, the house that was there, to leave the land as it was. In our part of town, you have to purchase 2 acres of land to build a home. We wanted to be surrounded by forest and trees, not by these panels. I believe that this project does not belong in a neighborhood setting. All of your renditions show these in rolling fields. I don't see any houses around your renditions. and it doesn't belong on Taft. I have spoken to several of the people on Taft, and they will be fighting this every step of the way.
So
There's a good place for this, and it was proposed years ago, a few years ago, and I don't know why it didn't go through. And I'd also like to know, are you getting a tax incentive, a break, for the first 5 years, whatever it may be? Like I said, we are here to preserve the land the way it is. And we are paying taxes on something we gain nothing for, just open space. So you have to have some compassion for that. Thank you.
certainly, thank you. So let me just make sure I capture it. Your concern is, again, the property value and the open space that you purchased around your home, and the trees, I'm assuming, on the property, on your property, and the vacant lot that you bought.
You're taking down all the trees behind us.
Okay. So, and then the other concern was, sorry, about the tax incentives that we might get for the project.
we pay an enormous amount of taxes.
I understood, yeah. So there are no tax breaks from the municipality or the state for our facility. There's no tax incentives for us at the local or state level for these projects.
So what makes you think that putting the panels in a residential area is appropriate?
No, I appreciate the concern, and I think the concern is the compatibility of the uses next to each other. That's a challenge for development anywhere, and I think when we look at the facility or we look at the proposed project, we look at ways we can minimize those impacts, and we hope to continue to work with you and other abutters to minimize those impacts. But it is one of the challenges of developing these projects, really anywhere. But one of the advantages of having these projects in Connecticut and in Enfield is those economic benefits stay here. A number of the other projects that were selected for to serve Connecticut's energy needs are actually out of state. So you're not getting those benefits. You're getting the power from those facilities, but you're not getting the additional tax benefits and other economic benefits from a new $30 million investment. But I would encourage you to continue to talk to me and John and figure out ways we can minimize our potential impact on you, on your property. And we've offered this up to other abutters as well. And I think you'll see already some change, although incremental, on our updated site plan that's here tonight in terms of the setback from your property. I want to say it's at least 100 feet at this point, if not more, and the plan is not to remove trees on that section of property line. But let's continue talking, and I do appreciate your questions and the concern.
Hi, Gretchen Pfeiffer Hall. I'm on the Conservation Commission, Agriculture Commission, was previously on inland wetlands. So I have a question about the studies, all the studies that you mentioned, and you can share any of the results. Are they public, and who reviews them? And additionally, the clear cutting of that land, so is that going to be your responsibility? Is that something that the property owners hire somebody so that they derive a benefit from the logging of that? And when that occurs, I presume you'll use best management practices so that there won't be runoff, because you're going to have to stump grub, whatever the term is.
Great, thank you for the question. So the question was about converting the forested area and how that process works, as well as the wetlands and the studies that were done and who reviews those. So I'll start with that piece. The natural resource and cultural resource studies that were done by third-party consultants that are qualified and work on these types of projects in Connecticut, so certified wetland and soil scientists and qualified archaeologists. The results of those studies will be part of our Siting Council petition. They'll be reviewed by the analog agencies in the Connecticut state government, so State Historic Preservation Officer, the Connecticut Deep wetland folks. But just one result that one of the results I can share, and we do have these reports, and we'll get them to you as well as the Siting Council as we get closer to the submittal date here. But there are no jurisdictional wetlands on the property, with the exception of one here. There are a number south of the property here, but there are no jurisdictional wetlands on the property, and we will not be impacting any wetlands or wetland buffers as part of the project. In terms of the conversion of the forested area to essentially pasture for the solar facility, the stumpage value, the logging rights, it varies by landowner, but typically the landowner keeps that value from the stumpage on their property. So we may clear it, we may do that conversion, but as part of our agreement with the landowner, they typically retain that stumpage value. So we basically pay them out for the value of their timber. In some other circumstances, and there's a few landowners back here, it's not, the Jarmarks are primarily here. There are other scenarios where sometimes the landowner wants to do it themselves, and that's perfectly fine as well. But we do not want landowners to be doing the grubbing part, and that's the removal of the stumps. And that's the sensitive part from a stormwater perspective, because you're opening up earth. And that's something that DEEP takes a close look at, and we are required to get stormwater permits, construction and operational stormwater permits for the facility from the state. Typically there is a construction period stormwater controls that are placed on the perimeter of the property and installed as we clear. So things like silt fence, stabilization on the property as the soils are open to assure that there's no sedimentation or erosion that occurs as part of the process. And then ultimately, once the project's construction is complete, there's long-term permanent stormwater controls. There's really not much new impervious associated with these projects, so there's not a lot of potential for water to build up or velocity to increase and cause erosion. But in the few discrete areas that there could be, there'll be stormwater controls in place for the life of the project, and it'll be seeded and mulched and maintained.
So, just two follow-up questions. Is that, I looked at the GIS, and there is sort of it's a hill, it's not flat.
Yeah.
So it's not flat, so how does that, how does that affect how you construct your project? Are you going to be leveling any of that? Because there's quite a difference in elevation from the road to the top of the hill. And is the project fenced? Because I've seen other projects where the whole thing is fenced in.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can see it back there. But a lot of the steeper topography, you can tell, is left out of our project area.
So the middle part I'll show you here, you're correct. This is essentially a hilltop, and this section is the steepest. So that section's left out of our project area. That won't be developed for panels. This area will be, but it's fairly gradual. It kind of plateaus off up there. We don't like to do grading. We don't like to move earth. We don't like to move materials. It's expensive. It's really our last resort. The panels, especially the fixed arrays, are very flexible in sort of the topography that they can deal with. So our expectation is that we really wouldn't be having to do much grading at all for the project. That's what we're hoping to do. And I'm sorry, I forgot your other question.
Fence.
The fence, thank you. So the project does need to be fenced. It's electrical code. It's a national code that these types of facilities need to be fenced. There's a fair amount of flexibility on what that fencing looks like. So we want to try to design the fencing, especially where it could be visible from residential areas, to minimize that visual impact. And there's some different types of fencing we can use there.
Can we?
Yeah,
This guy's had his hand up.
You ready? Okay.
My name is Representative Carol Hall. I actually represent this district. So I have a number of questions. As you might imagine, my phone has been ringing off the hook since this has hit the public radar. And here's some concerns. So I appreciate you all being here tonight and doing this presentation. Some of the concerns I have personally are that some of these meetings are taking place in vacation month. So I've heard from people on Taft and Charnley, obviously, quite a few of them, saying that they were unable to come to supposedly a meeting you held a while ago, I think on the Jarmox farm, because of the time of year. They didn't feel like they had enough notice, so a lot of people are away in August. It's a tough month. I noticed your next hearing is August 31st. That happens to be a holiday weekend, which is, again, it almost seems like it's planned this way. So it's a little alarming to me that they're taking place in vacation months, and then your next meeting is a holiday weekend. So it's Thursday the 31st, which you've got Labor Day that weekend. So it would be great from a rep's perspective to hold something in the fall when everybody is back from vacations and tuned in to what's going on. So it's a little difficult during a vacation month to try to catch people. That's what I've heard for feedback. A lot of people aren't able to attend these meetings. This was kind of thrown together, I know, by our town departments, which is wonderful. I think it's great you're here doing this. So I appreciate that, but I think we need to do a little better on the notifications. I'd love to have a list of who you've already met with, to see if they're the people that are reaching out to me, so we can all be on the same page. Our biggest concerns are obviously in the neighborhoods. So you're impacting, and I'm sure you know this, our local regulations don't permit solar farms in residential neighborhoods. We have very specific zoning regulations, and they talk to solar farms going into industrial areas. It's what our local regulations say, and I'm sure you're aware of that. I know you've followed all the regulations that the state's put forward. I'm not here questioning that. All I'm making a point to bring that to your attention is this isn't what the town of plan and conservation for this particular location speaks to. So I think with residents' concerns with the visual that's going to have and the impact on the properties, when they were putting together the zoning regulations for these expanded solar projects, they took into consideration property values in residential areas. So that was really important. So that being said, I would suggest holding, and maybe if it's possible, moving that 31st meeting to a week that people can actually maybe attend. My next question goes to the barns on the property. This is all private property. We all understand that and appreciate it. But as you heard from some local residents, that part of town people move to because it is farmland and it's beautiful and the scenery is beautiful. And we understand that those farms can go away anytime to subdivisions because they're residentially zoned. So my question is the historic barns on the property, especially the ones that run behind Taft Lane. Can you tell us what the plans are for those barns?
Okay. Yeah. So, and I just want to capture the concern. So the concern is the zoning, the land currently it's not an allowed use if we were going through the town process. And then the timing also of our meetings was not ideal for summer vacations. And then the concern that the barns would go away. So I'll take the last one first. The barns, we've looked at them. They're not actually historic. They're not as old as they look. No offense, Steve. They're not as old as they look, and the plan is to recycle some of them, a number of them, and take them down. And Steve would, use the lumber or rebuild them elsewhere on some other part of his farm. So the plan is that we would remove a number of them. The
Number means all or how many? What's the plan?
We can show you guys. It's the majority of them, I guess I would say, to be upfront with you. Yeah.
There'll be some on the east side of the road that'll be saying.
And part of that is, they're not historic. They're in most cases less than 10 or 20 years old. 50 years is sort of the milestone for a historic structure. And then, in terms of the zoning issue, that's certainly something that we were aware of, and it's a concern. It's challenging for us to cite these large utility scale projects on brownfields. They're typically not large enough. They're typically not associated with existing electrical infrastructure. So even if we were to say target a brownfield site in Connecticut or elsewhere, it's probably not going to be large enough to accommodate a project of this size. You need a project of this size to get economical energy rates, or smaller projects really don't have the economies of scale to produce cheap electricity. And then if you were to build on a brownfield site, typically there's a long gen-tie line, electrical line, transmission line, like the gentleman was asking about before, to actually be able to get it to interconnect. But that said, we're sensitive of these residential issues and the abutters, and we are still early in the process, and this is why we did the abutter meeting, because we wanted to talk to the neighbors first, and we'll continue to do that. Now, the timing of this was certainly not, it's not disingenuous, or we're not trying to do this out of sequence or in the summertime for any other reason than we just got our interconnection agreement with Eversource. We're at the point where we're ready to move forward. We just completed all of our natural resource studies. We have a requirement to the utilities of Connecticut to have this project operating at a certain time. So it's a scheduling issue to just keep it moving. Now, that said, your feedback on the August 31st meeting is completely valid. I totally understand that. It's not set in stone at all. So we'll regroup with our team, and we'll reschedule that for some time. Ideally in September. I'm assuming school starts at after Labor Day or sometime around Labor Day. So we'll do it after Labor Day when folks aren't on vacation, and we'll make sure that folks can come to that meeting.
Just a point of information.
Yes.
Industrial land. Just a point of information. The question was industrial land, and you talked about brownfields. There are hundreds of acres in Enfield zoned industrial with farms on them.
Yeah. Again,
Thank you.
It's the proximity.
That was my next.
That was helpful. Thank you. I didn't understand that nuance there. So.
Sure. So when we were initially prospecting in Connecticut, we did kind of a wide, kind of search throughout the area. And I was part of the prospecting team here in Enfield. And one of the things I did was look for industrial acreage that's currently being farmed. There's, some areas in Enfield, like you say, that have enough acreage that could be a good solar site, but they don't have the close proximity to the electrical infrastructure like a substation like Skidco. And so if we need to build our own electrical infrastructure that adds additional cost to our project, running into the millions of dollars. Additionally, land costs are often much higher in areas where developers think that there's a large industrial use or a large warehouse use. Commercial acreage, oftentimes it's not within the budget of a solar project. We're just not cost competitive in what we can offer on power prices to kind of enter that market. And so I've looked here in Enfield for acreage, and this is really kind of the top utility scale site, so close to the Skidco substation. And then on the abutter thing, we sent out notices. We got an abutter list from the town and from the town's GIS data, and so I went through. I think there was between 40 and 50 actual property owners adjacent to this project, and so we sent out a mailer with an invite in early July to come to the meeting last week. I don't think everybody received it based on the feedback that I received. Those that did receive it, some of them, I spoke with some folks on Taft Lane today, thought it was like an advertisement that we were trying to sell them something, and threw it out. And so we realized kind of in the week before and 2 weeks before, we weren't getting a lot of RSVPs for the meeting. We still had pretty good turnout actually when the event came, but we did kind of a round. Justin and I did a round of calls to whoever we could find White Pages numbers for, and try to make sure we could connect with people there. And we were able to drive, probably 10 additional RSVPs that way. There were folks that didn't have a White Pages number and didn't respond to our mailer. And so what I'm going to be doing in the next couple weeks is kind of whatever I need to meet with all of the abutters. If it comes down to door knocking, it's something I do. We've done that in Brooklyn and Canterbury for our Quinnebog Solar project. A colleague of mine and I spent 2 weeks just knocking on doors different times a day to make sure we connected with every landowner. And we're going to do the same thing here. And so I've been trying to make follow-up calls with folks that did attend the meeting, and then hopefully try to set up time so we can meet kind of privately as well. And I'll be doing that with the folks on Taft Lane. I was able to connect with 2 households that brought up your name, as well as somebody to talk to. And so we will be continuing to do that reach out over the next few weeks.
And just, I just want to follow up with a quick comment. So as far as what we've done, what I can speak to myself, what I've done is I have reached out to our local leadership, our mayor, deputy mayor, and our district person for this particular project. And we have talked about the town getting standing going forward with this, because I think it's a good way to keep the residents engaged and make sure that they are having an open communication through the town to you, and that their concerns and needs are being met. So it is on the town's radar. I think moving forward, once you file with the Connecticut Siting Council, then I am hopeful that the town will look for standing in the project, because I think it's important to the residents in this town to make sure that their needs are looked out for. So that being said, I'll pass the mic, and then if I think of any other questions on here, I'll follow up.
And that's great. We completely encourage the town to seek party status, and I know that's an easy process for the Siting Council, through the Siting Council. And like I said, but even ahead of that, we intend to make sure that the town council here and the boards and the commissions that are interested are up to speed, are getting the same documents that are going to the Siting Council, and really trying to be as transparent as we can through this process. Yes, sir. Sorry, you've been waiting so patiently.
My name is Kiran Majmudar. I'm part of the town's Economic Development Commission. So first, as part of the mission of the Economic Development Commission, welcome. I like the program of outreach that you presented and are going to pursue, and wish you good with the Siting Council on all the licensing process. I've been involved in the power industry for many, many years, including Florida Power and Light way back when in the 70s and 80s, and now in solar. As economic development of the town, number one would be where I'm assuming that with a $30 million investment, your return over 20 years is good. Not looking for numbers, but what I'm saying is give us some good idea also that yes, the business will be also profiting from this, because that's part of the economic development process is. That's number one. Number two, and this has been addressed by you, the town and the surrounding community have good local industrial, commercial, construction, etc. base, and therefore I like the way you'd like to approach it, that engage the local businesses, local expertise that's available, and you'll have good, if not better results, and that's the way we would, in this community, would like to see the project proceed through the permitting as well as through the construction process, operations, of course, later on. But thank you very much. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you for your feedback. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name's Jeff Krause. I actually live on Taft. So I have all the same concerns that have been addressed, but some other things I just wanted to know when you're talking about fencing or different ones, like how far are they going to back? I mean, I live directly in front of it.
Yeah.
And then when you're going on to Abbey, it looks like you are from what I'm seeing. I didn't see any other maps, but you know, how visible is it going to be? Right now, there's a thin line of trees,
Yeah.
but it's fields.
Yeah. Understood. So the concerns on the fencing and the visibility. The fencing will be as close as we can get it to the panels, but we still have to be able to mow around it, basically, is the short answer to that. That tree line there, to the extent that it's on our property, it's our intention to retain that to the extent that we can.
That's a thin line,
That's a thin
and there's
tree line.
houses right there.
It's
So
true.
That's
So-
concerning.
Understood. And so my second part of that is those are deciduous trees, the leaves fall off.
Right.
So half the year they're not there for all intents and purposes. So
I believe your wife actually showed me a picture.
Did she?
Of
Oh,
what-
all right. I wasn't home today. Hours away.
So we need to think about landscaping. We need to
Right.
think about what we can do creatively to work with you and your neighbors to make sure we're reducing those impacts, whether that's planting conifers or adjusting things a little bit where we can. Happy to do that, and Jonathan will definitely follow.
Oh, and I got to thank you. You did reach out to us. We did get a mailing, but I know a lot of my neighbors didn't, or maybe down the street. I mean, we're directly in front.
Yeah, but I was able to meet actually with one of your other neighbors was at your house.
Okay.
Your wife
Like
got a
I
hold.
said,
Your
I
wife
wasn't
got a.
home today,
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Your wife got a hold of her. That is your. Yeah, I think. But yeah, I got a hold of her, and they were able to come over. They might have received our mailing or not, and they threw it out. And so I have good contact information. I'm always looking for more contact information, and you guys can hand out my phone number. It's great. So we got
One last thing, and then we're getting the hook.
100 acres, okay? How many panels, how tall?
Good question. So the panel racking height, and we have to dial this in as we proceed with the design. It won't exceed approximately 12 feet on the back end, and it's usually between 2 and 3 feet on the front end.
12 feet high, how many panels?
Total?
100 acre lot.
Again, that's
It was in
it's approximately 80,000 panels. Let's call it, give or take. So, yeah.
3,000 homes a year, give or take.
About how much power
Okay,
this
how much
one
power.
covers. Yeah. So anyway, we look forward to continuing our conversation with all of you, the interested folks in the town, as well as the state reps. We'd like to really dial in what the taxes will be on the project, so we're going to continue talking to the town leadership about that. So hopefully next time we're talking to the public, we're talking to the abutters and interested parties. We have some of those numbers, so you can understand what the benefits to the town will be from the project. But we'll continue to stay in touch. We'll change that meeting to sometime in September.
And we'll publicly announce it.
We'll publicly announce it. It'll be in the newspaper. And otherwise, look for John in your neighborhood.
He's not selling it.
If you want to put if you want to put your dogs away, that might help. Thank you all. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
We do have a preliminary site plan. I know I'm kind of waving it around, but if anybody wants to